There are countless people who know Coffee Stain Studios, creators of Satisfactory and Goat Simulator and publishers of Valheim and Deep Rock Galactic. While they might be classed as a relatively small publisher, I don't think I could ever describe any of their titles as small. Where did this all begin? I think it's about time that we rewind all the way back to 2011, when Coffee Stain Studios was about to release their first game. And so I can answer the question, what the f*** is Sanctum? While Sanctum may have been a massive hit on release, it seems to have fallen into relative obscurity, and you could pass that up to better games just being released since then, but looking back on it, I really don't think that's the case. Even its own sequel, Sanctum 2, feels pretty off in comparison to the first, but before we get into that, let's go over this game with a nearly perfect score on Steam. In almost all respects, Sanctum is little more than a tower defense game. You place down blocks to funnel enemies where you want, you place down towers to whittle down enemies and to stop them from getting to that big ball of mysterious health. And that's where it ends. Well, there is one more part. In Sanctum, the player has a little bit more agency during gameplay, and that's because of the guns. Between Sanctums 1 and 2, there are a few guns shared between the two of them, those being the Assault, Sniper, Shotgun, Freeze Gun, Tesla Gun, and last but not least, Rex. More were added in Sanctum 2, but for the interest of time we'll try to stick to these for the moment. Each of these weapons have an alternate fire, adding a massive amount of versatility to your arsenal. For example, the assault rifle can also fire a grenade. The shotgun unloads its entire magazine in a wide area in front of you after some charge. The freeze gun will slow enemies or freeze enemies in place for a few seconds. The Tesla gun fires a short arc of electricity that constantly damages enemies or shoots at a long-range beam that bounces between them. The sniper rifle has the obvious zoom in, and Rex, while already being an incredibly powerful rocket launcher, can also fire homing cluster missiles. In comparison to a lot of games today, this selection of guns can seem small and mediocre. But to me, that comparison works both ways. While Sanctum's collection of firearms seems small, their versatility in comparison to a lot of other first-person shooters is immense, especially considering that you can equip 3 of these weapons in Sanctum 1 and 2 of them in Sanctum 2, and that's not even where the options end for the player. Upon choosing a map in Sanctum, you will be presented with a loadout where you can decide what weapons and towers you want to bring to the game, before you're essentially given a blank canvas. Your entire job is to build a maze for the enemy to progress through, and stop them from reaching that big ball of miscellaneous health I spoke about earlier. The options you have during gameplay are almost limitless. Before each wave begins, you're given an indicator on the enemies that will be navigating your maze. Then, you're able to place down blocks to funnel enemies through. From the towers you've chosen, you can then place them down for a cost, of course. Different towers are better against different enemies. For my weapons, I usually take the Tesla gun, Freeze gun, and Rex, while for towers, my go-to is the Scatterlaser, Violator, Drone, Accelerator, Slow Pads, and Teleport Pads, just in case I need them. The way you can route enemies around the map may vary quite a bit. The only real limit is your creativity and the grid block system. Just keep in mind that when you're building this maze, there are enemies that fly over the top and ignore all of it, and always prepare for the flyers. Without a doubt, they have been the #1 reasons I have lost my game. It could be my reliance on scatterlasers, but I like to think it's because they're assholes. Outside of the enemies dictating how you place your towers, you also have the added difficulty of the maps. Whether it be Mine or Glade, Corporation or Whirlpool, each map challenges you to approach the way you build your mazes in completely different ways. My approach is to funnel enemies down long, tedious mazes full of nothing but slow floors while laughing maniacally as I fry them with my Tesla gun, just like the in-game character. But I mean, if you don't want to play the game correctly, that's up to you, I suppose. In terms of genre, I would say that Sanctum 1 is a tower defense with first-person shooting kind of added on to the side, while in Sanctum 2, that feels like the exact opposite. Sanctum 2 changes up the formula a bit from its predecessor. With the increased selection of weapons and a limit on towers, this game increases the power of individual towers a little bit and relies a lot more on how you utilize your loadout in hopes of surviving the waves. The maps also introduce stage hazards, like steam geysers that could injure both you and enemies once walked through. These are definitely things that add a lot to the game, but personally, the game feels a little lacking to me. The visuals and feel of the game still to this day feel pretty good, but because of the limitations they needed to place on the game because of consoles, the game feels almost stunted in a lot of ways. The ability to route enemies between your towers stays relatively the same, but instead of both your buildings and blocks costing points that you get at the end of the waves, instead you're drip-fed the bases that you can then place towers on top of. Not only that, but because of the increased tower damage, you get far less points, meaning you might only be able to place one of the towers down after each round, and that's only if you're not planning on upgrading anything. This can feel quite frustrating, especially considering that a lot of the towers are locked behind the brand new progression system, and that means you might not be able to complete maps purely because you don't have the tools that make this game so much easier, and that's especially prominent when we start to get into the bosses. Adding challenge to your game isn't something that you should be opposed to, but when you have systems that actively work against your ability to complete the maps, that's when it starts to change from challenge into sheer annoyance. And this is something that the developers spoke about as well. In a post-mortem released by the developers, they say, "We wanted to make everything we liked with Sanctum and expand upon that. Instead of just releasing the game with a few changes and new content, we decided to rebuild the game from scratch. A lot of core features of the game were prototyped in the beginning, but were never really evaluated until it was too late. The result was okay, but not quite as good as we wanted. And then we had the big bomb, the resource system. This was something we should have iterated much sooner since it was such an essential feature of the game. In the end, we had a system none of us really liked, but we thought it was good enough." Which honestly is good insight for anyone making video games. And I feel like that's a lot of the consensus you would see for a lot of publishers of the game. It's just a bit of a shame that this was the final product, even though the game itself isn't terrible. The music in Sanctum is incredibly unique and interesting. A majority of the tracks from Sanctum 1 give this super airy vibe, very reminiscent of the Borderlands 2 soundtrack, even though this released a year and a half earlier. In fact, a lot of the music reminds me of what Jasper Kide produces, which is outstanding for me, considering just how many of his tracks have sat within games that have shaped my childhood, like the Borderlands series, Hitman, and Assassin's Creed. Adding to the already alien atmosphere that surrounds this game, the track Elysian 1 is a perfect example. But that only adds to my confusion about this game. With such incredible music lying under the skin, why do so little people talk about it, or even remember it? Which brings me to Sanctum 2. Considering how fantastic the songs of Sanctum 1 are, I expected Sanctum 2 to be no different, but I was quickly proven wrong. I have nothing against Leonard Helmer, but in comparison to the tracks present in the first game, these definitely come across as repetitive and boring. Even while listening to the soundtrack and trying to get an opinion, I was getting tired of listening to track after track, considering the sheer lack of evolution present through each of them. And while, yes, there are a lot more tracks in Sanctum 2 compared to its predecessor, I would have much rather that they cut back on the amount if it were to increase the creativity and movement in each of them, instead of the bland house music that we end up getting. Between the two of these games, there is a lot to love. whether it be the freeform maze designing or the very creative guns and weaponry. Sanctum set itself up as an incredibly solid launching platform for what is now a pretty respectable company. And even if I'm not the biggest fan of their new titles, I think it goes without saying that they've built up a pretty solid fan base for a lot of very good reasons. But regardless of what's happening now, I think these two games are a point in history that deserve to be remembered, not only because of their creativity, but just how much dedication and care is oozing from every inch of both of these titles. And while Sanctum 2 might not have sold as much as they wanted it to, it was still a pretty profitable game, and even today keeps people coming back so they can re-experience one of their favorite childhood memories. And that, at least to me, means that it had all the impact that it needed. That's going to be the end of this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Keep an eye out for more of these on the channel, and I'll catch you in the next one.